Welcome to Stories Worth Hearing. I'm your host, John Quick. Every once in a while, you meet somebody whose life story reminds you that success, failure, and redemption are often much closer together than we think. Today's guest is somebody whose name became known around the world through the rise and fall of Fyre Festival. But this conversation is not just about headlines, it's about the full story behind them. My guest today is Billy McFarland, an entrepreneur who started building companies at a remarkably young age. In fact, Billy got his start back in middle school after buying a server and launching his own website domain hosting company. From there, he went on to pursue bigger and bigger ideas. In this episode, Billy shares the mindset that drove him as a young entrepreneur, the experiences that shaped his life, and the difficult chapter that ultimately led him to serve time in prison. We talked about what that experience taught him, how it's changed his perspective, and what redemption looks like when someone is trying to rebuild their life and reputation. We also talked about the drive in him today, the lessons he would give entrepreneurs just starting out, and the ventures he is now focused on building as he works toward a new chapter. It is an honest conversation about ambition, accountability, and the belief that people can grow beyond their worst moments. This is a story about second chances, and it is definitely a story worth hearing. Well, Billy, super excited to chat with you. We kind of missed each other a couple times, but glad you're on. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, John. Great to be here. Excited to chat today.
Yeah, it'll be fun to hear your story. I think I've listened to your story from afar, like most people have, through documentaries and those kinds of things on Hulu and Netflix. And so it'll be fun to kind of get to know you as a person and have folks that listen to this show get to know you a little bit. So take me back, way back to, what first got you interested or realizing that starting businesses is something that intrigued you and that you were pretty good at?
So I grew up in the early days of cable internet. I just remember specifically being in fifth grade and around Christmas time, my house, along with the majority of the houses in the suburb I lived in New Jersey, all got like cable internet for the first time. And it kind of felt like it was like literally this wire to a whole world out there where there were no parents, there were no rules, and there were no boundaries. So like the early days of the internet became that like day one introduction or catalyst into the world of entrepreneurship.
So, what was the actual first business that you ever started? Do you remember? Was it like one when you were a kid, or did you wait till like you were in college to start one? What was the first business that you ever started that was like a real business?
My first business was a web hosting company that I started in middle school, where I bought a physical server, installed it in my house, found a way to upgrade my internet line, and charge people $5 a month to basically have their website go online. So served a lot of local businesses, served a lot of small businesses around the US. And that was my first intro to like what it was like to do customer service, to have some revenue, and to really have like the responsibilities of a business.
So that you're kind of like the early on, you're your own GoDaddy or Namecheap, basically.
Yeah, way back when. I think this is obviously far before cloud hosting, far before Amazon AWS, and everybody needed what's called at the time a web host to get online. So I was providing those web hosting services.
So what do you think about like nowadays kids? They want to become the CEO day one. They forget the kind of hustle and grind step that I think folks that grew up when you or I maybe grew up. I'm probably a little older than you, but we didn't have all the luxuries of having the instant Instagram and Snapchat and all these tools right in front of us that lends itself to people making money as creators. What do you think the biggest difference is between somebody that like yourself who hustled and grinded early on without those tools and somebody today is? Is there an advantage to going your route as opposed to what kids are introduced to today, or is there a disadvantage?
I think the difference now is that kids and even me, we're exposed to the 0.0001% of the extremes through social media, and whether that's the most successful entrepreneurs, the least successful, or the biggest failures, people who are making the most money, people who are making the least money. I think social media gives you access to the extremes in the world that by default most of us wouldn't be able to see without it. So I think in some ways that's motivating because you see what's possible. I think in other ways, it creates this feeling of entitlement that I think I've seen a lot with the younger workers, where because they see someone who's that outlier or that extreme success, they believe that because they're smart and because they work hard, that they should have that too. So it's like this weird dichotomy where you can see what's possible and it's motivating. But at the same time, I think it's understanding that just because someone else, is the best doesn't mean that you deserve that on day one yourself.
For folks that have lived under a rock for the last 5 years, you started a music festival brand, Fyre Festival, and I'm sure there's more to it than that. But talk to me a little bit about how that first came to be for folks that have been living under a rock and haven't turned on Netflix or Hulu before. Tell me a little bit about how the heck you came up with that idea.
So I think I'm most well known, unfortunately, for what was the Fyre Festival, which initially was an attempt at hosting a music festival on a small island in the Bahamas, and finally came to life through a new name called Phoenix this past December in the Caribbean off of Honduras. Prior to Fyre Festival, I'd started numerous businesses back to the web hosting company. I had a lot of failures, a lot of small wins, and those kind of compounded into what Fyre Festival became. And the idea was to take entrepreneurs, talent, fashion designers from New York or Miami or Alaska, wherever they live, bring them to a remote island that they probably wouldn't have even heard of without us, and really try to help foster these different connections and bonds that inevitably happen when you're stuck on an island for 3 days. We miserably failed in terms of the execution of the first Fyre Festival. However, the marketing for it was either good or bad, depending on who you are. And that's created this monsoon of media and press around the name Fyre, and hopefully gives me an opportunity going forward to build businesses.
Yeah, you hear Tom Brady talk a lot about how, you know, his biggest lessons in his life have been his failures, like what he learns in his failures as opposed to what he's learned in the Super Bowls of his life that he's won. What was it like for you having the Fyre Festival and, as you just put it, failed in some ways? What were some of those lessons that you've learned? Because most people in your shoes would just kind of like go about their life, maybe become a Walmart greeter, and you'll never hear from them again. That wasn't in your DNA. It didn't seem to slow you down. It seemed like you got back up, learned from it, and kept going. So what were some of those lessons that you learned from Fyre Festival?
Two main lessons, and they contradict each other a little bit. So I think first is that life is all about the people. It was once again on the roller coaster ride of entrepreneurship, and I kind of hit a pretty fast accelerating point in my early 20s where I had a couple of small wins and they were compounding and resulted in this company called Fyre, where at the peak we had over 700 employees and it was growing really fast and raised a lot of venture capital, et cetera. And it literally went from feeling like we're climbing the mountain at record speed to having absolutely nothing overnight. And that was a really weird experience. And when I lost, whether it was the money, the team members, the friends, the thing I missed the most were the people. It wasn't the experiences. It wasn't like the luxurious adventures. I missed having that core group of friends and family who I could really like be there with. So I think that kind of reset the focus to wanting to grow life in the future with like a small core group. And then I think also what was the motivating part is that like no one really fucking cares, right? Like I get questions all the time, like, how can people trust you? Like, how can you continue to work? And in reality, just nobody cares. If I can find a way to do something interesting or provide some value or make a connection or be entertaining, people will tune in. And if I can't, then they won't, right? So I think like your merit means more than anything you've done in the past. But at the same time, it only matters if you have that core group that you're really trying to grow and exceed with.
Is there somebody that you've kind of looked up to along the way? I'm sure you've had your fair share of very successful mentors and folks that have been in your life, but has there been kind of that one or two key people in your life that's believed in you regardless?
That's a good question. I think what's been hard for me is that most of the people who invested in Fyre had backed my previous businesses. So I had known them for a number of years before they invested and obviously lost with the Fyre Festival investment. So I feel like that's my biggest source of guilt, but it's also my biggest source of motivation. And there's a handful of them that left their marks on me in various ways. And I think it's wanting to repay that belief and repay that trust. And I think kind of the interesting factor for me is that when things failed, the people that were the most supportive behind the scenes were actually the biggest investors. So the ones that lost the most are the ones that kind of gave me that hope and that motivation to keep pushing forward.
And nobody's coming to save you. Something I've learned as well. You got to do it on your own. You come back and you start
um, another business and launch a new music festival. Talk to me about the idea behind that. I'm sure that you had your fair share of people writing you thinking you were crazy to do another music festival, but I actually tuned into some of it. It looked like it was fairly successful and it and everybody had a good time. Talk to me about wanting to do another one and having it be able to execute it and have it be successful. I'm sure that felt awesome.
I think it was really hard to find my footing post release from prison. I went to jail when I was 26. I finished in my early 30s. And I felt like when I had started fast out of the gate, now I was basically in last place and started like literally with nothing. So I think it was a weird feeling. And as it took some time and some small projects that were both good and bad along the way, I kind of got the sense that I just needed to prove that we could do it. I needed to improve that the intentions behind Fyre were always really pure. And I also wanted to show that it could be a net positive for a lot of people's lives by making the festival happen. We actually failed again. We tried to do Fyre Festival 2 in Mexico. We announced the festival there. And after the media went crazy, Mexican government released a statement saying they've never heard of fire. So that was kind of like a crazy
Oh
slap in
man,
the
I bet
face.
that was like a shit. Is this going to happen again?
I mean, I was getting calls from my probation officer being like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, how are you scheduling a festival? They don't know you exist. And it's like, how do I tell them that we just got scammed by the Mexican government without saying that? So it was kind of like a weird situation. That passed. We found a great home on this island called Utila. It's in the Caribbean off of Honduras. Really unique place. Like the best coral reef I've ever seen. There are no cars, so everybody gets around by like golf carts or ATVs or dirt bikes, and ultimately became this great host for what we called the Phoenix Festival to rise from the ashes. And we did that just in December. So it's been 3 months since the Phoenix Festival finally happened.
And are there more festivals in the works? What's kind of on the horizon for you?
Absolutely. So long term, I'd love to have a hotel where I can do these permanent Phoenix or Fire-esque kind of adventure weekends and experiences. But the festivals itself will be a big part of that. It'll be a big driver for media, for guests to come. So our next one will be back in the same location on Utila in Honduras.
So going back a little bit, you said you'd went to prison. Most people don't have to do that. Talk to me a little bit about, did you have like an oh crap moment, like a week before you're headed to federal penitentiary? Talk to me a little bit about what that was like and how the hell do you bounce back from something like that? Because again, most people don't. There's something unique inside of you that's just like refuses to give up.
I think it was
How
the
that's a crazy experience to say. I mean, you're in there for a number of years, right? 3 years, 4 years,
I
something
served
like
just
that.
over four. So yeah,
Wow.
4 years. The hardest part for me, and I think one of the other lessons is my life had been this constant, desperate sprint up until Fire. I'd wake up, I'd get bills to pay, and I had to find a way to pay them to keep this dream of the festival alive. And I'll never forget the moment when I was sentenced. I was sentenced to 6 years. And just like hearing 6 years when I was 25 or 26 years old. And at the point, I was literally like living by the second, living by the minute. And hearing that period of time, I just couldn't fathom how long that was. I think I was trying to get my mind in terms of how long life is and trying to justify why that was probably fair and really getting my head around the scope of time that I had to serve.
So does your motivation, what drives you? Is it you wanting to be successful? Is it you wanting to prove your critics wrong? Because again, it's like you don't have, if people are paying attention to you now and still, which I'm sure they are, you seem to not have an off button. What the heck drives you to keep going when most people just give
Yeah,
up?
that's a great question. And my definition of success has certainly changed pre-Fire and post-Fire. I think pre-Fire, it was like I was like the kid exploring the playground where Fire, my previous businesses, they gave me the means or the doors, the introductions to see what was possible in the world. And it was kind of like this fun challenge where I wanted to see like what else I could do. I think success now is I really remember the bad days in jail where, I didn't have a penny, family or friends were calling me and I just couldn't be there to help them and like unrelated to finances, right? Just like not being able to be there. And I think the idea of being like hopeless and powerless is the scariest thing in the world. So I want to be successful enough where I can never be in that fetal position again, where I have some ability to help my family, help my close friends, and just really like be there as a man and not be someone who's like lost and forgotten and worthless.
So what does a legacy look like for you? Let's say it's 40 years from now and you're sipping Mai Tais on the beach, what do you think you would look back on and say, man, I'm glad I kept going. That was a success. What does that look like for you?
There's like a list of people that I feel like I owe. Some of them are financial, some of them are trust, some of them is just like pure, relationship based, like family, et cetera. And I think it's having those people be able to look me in the eye and vice versa in 40 years and being like, hey, you did it and like you paid us back. And once again, not only financially, but you paid us back for the mistakes that you made. And I feel like that would be the, satisfaction of life.
Has faith played a role in any of this to you? Or have you gone about this on your own grit? Most people, or a lot of people, find faith in moments where they have nothing else left really to choose or lose. Did that play a role in your kind of redemptive story?
I think it has for different periods. I think I've continued to oscillate in the spectrum of what I believe and what I don't believe and like what I think is right and what I think is wrong. So I think I'm still learning. If prison was interesting because there are a lot of like very religious people of all ends of the spectrum. So getting to see and learn and like literally like breathe in different religions at the most extreme level every day was kind of a wild experience. So yeah, I think it's something that like I've tried to take from all sides and trying to find my own views. And I think it's probably a still ongoing journey.
So one of the things you did that I found fascinating was you sold I think your life rights or the Fyre brand on eBay, and it went for a pretty penny. Talk to me a little bit about how that idea came to be, and what does that mean for the person who bought it? Are they going to be doing a documentary on you, or any details you can share? I'd love to hear.
So the reason why we chose eBay was we thought it made the least sense, which we, I think, correctly believe would create the biggest media storm, right? Like Fyre was a social media first brand. So why not pick a legacy platform to sell that brand on? And, we thought that would drive a lot of interest and we think it did. After the situation in Mexico where we scheduled a music festival and the local government there just got scared by the press and they distanced themselves and basically went back on Fyre. We thought that me plus Fyre was too much for these locations to handle. So we felt like that we could keep the theme of it alive and just change the name. And ultimately that worked. The owners of Fyre are a company called LimeWire. I know they have some plans for it.
Oh, LimeWire bought it. That's cool.
LimeWire bought it. So I'll leave those plans with them. However, we did finish filming a Fyre 2 documentary that was separate from the LimeWire sale. I hope that airs sometime like later this year, but that included all of like the Phoenix event in Honduras, the failure in Mexico. So a lot of interesting stuff in that doc.
That's cool. So what's some advice you'd give for young entrepreneurs that are going to be listening to this? A lot of folks that listen to my show are aspiring entrepreneurs, maybe entrepreneurs that haven't quite cracked the code yet. What's some advice you'd give to folks starting early on in their entrepreneur journey?
It's corny, but you have a lot of time. And I think all of the bad decisions I made in my 20s that led to prison, that led to, letting people down, were the lack of understanding of time. I felt like I needed it all like right then and like right that second. And that was wrong. And I'm in 12 years later, I wish I understood the value of time, and starting from scratch now is something I wouldn't have had to do if I was a little bit more patient with a couple decisions. I think it's really important to move quickly, but move quickly within reason and realize that you can't build something great or acquire a lot of success or build a massive network all in one day. And it takes time.
What about tools at their disposal? Something that you've done that I've noticed is, utilizing social media and getting very personal and vulnerable on there and kind of giving people a peek behind the curtain. Is that naturally kind of just who you are, or is that a strategy that other folks could kind of pick up on? Because I think there's authenticity is what people really, really want in life for the most part. And being corporate and cookie cutter is not something that I think does well on social media. So tell me a little bit about your strategy on social media, because it seems to be like a day in the life of Billy. And
I think things always will change. We got to a point where everything became over polished. HR speak took over the world, right? Whether it's people like writing their diatribes on LinkedIn or people posting like perfectly edited videos of their life on Instagram to make them look like prettier than they are, wealthier than they are, happier than they are. I think things just became so over polished that subconsciously we started to tune that out and we started to like the opposite. Like really simply, like the Instagram algorithm favors like raw selfie videos over heavily edited, pieces of content. So I think as things became too polished, people started to naturally gravitate towards that more authentic like look where we're showing our raw issues and flaws. So I'd highly recommend that for marketing.
So you mentioned you have a Fyre 2 documentary coming out. Anything else on the horizon that folks should be aware of? I want to be mindful of your time here. Talk to me about any of your projects that you got on the horizon. Would love to hear about it.
So I do a lot of marketing work for brands. I help them connect with talent and create activations around that. So that's the day-to-day. I have another TV project on the works outside of the documentary side, and really looking forward to building the next festival and hopefully hotel in the Caribbean. So trying to really focus on what we love to do and bring some people together.
Nice. Well, folks listening in, I'll put all the links in the podcast description. Billy, I really appreciate you joining us here for a quick 25 minutes. We wish you nothing but success. You're welcome back anytime. And thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, John.
Appreciate it.